Welcome back to Public Administration. This week, we're moving on to Chapter 10 of the textbook, and in this chapter, we're looking at public administration and the public. And as usual, you're going to continue the discussion, so we're going to go on and post responses on Discussion 10. So again, I want you to log on at least 3 different days and start your responses. Have at least the 6 different responses over the course of the week. Then read Chapter 10, and then we're going to move on with our paper. So you're going to do the policy implementation Dropbox assignment, complete the Chapter 10 quiz. There's a podcast you can listen to. It's actually fairly short, but it's a very fascinating subject and something that seems to come up in the news quite often. Every time I'm offering this class, actually. And then we're going to do initial posts on Discussion 11. And so there's 2 different posts. One will be reflected back on the discussion on the podcast. The other one you'll use to apply it to yourself, or how a public administrator could use the information from this. And then there's an optional quiz you can take. And so what I'll do is I'll go through everything with you again. So of course we have our key points for the chapter. I do these every chapter in place of a PowerPoint. So the key points are here. Then you have your Chapter 10 quiz. Make sure you're doing your discussion. And there's going to be a Discussion 11, which you're going to first listen to this podcast to do. So when you click on this, it will pull up the podcast for This American Life. This is an episode from a couple of years ago. And it's actually about police shootings. And so it's something that is, like I said, in the news quite often. And this has to do actually with a group of recommendations that were given to the Las Vegas Police Department. They wanted to address the issue of shootings that may not be justified. And so what they did was there was contact between them and the Department of Justice. This is a federal issue. So, right now there's discussion over, is this something that's a state issue? And in the past, the Department of Justice has stepped in to try to deal with shootings. And it is a federal issue if it becomes a civil rights case. It can be a federal issue. So in this, you could listen to the whole podcast, but you're able to actually listen to part of it. And so what you do is when you hit play, you can find your starting point move this down a bit. You can find your starting point in the podcast. So if you get to, let's see here, 3730 is where I have it marked as a starting point. 3730. And so you can just start it here if you like. If you want more background information, I do recommend you listen to the whole thing. But you can, if you're short on time, you can go ahead and shave off the first 37 minutes and 30 seconds or so. It'll leave you about 25 minutes of the podcast to listen to. Again, this is a podcast. It's not going to be a video. So there's not much to look at, but I do want you to pay attention. Once you listen to that, you're going to have a couple questions. So you're going to discuss an example of how the Las Vegas Police Department responded to the recommendations of the Department of Justice to include basic implicit bias training. I want you to discuss what impact this would have and how they dealt with the public. So apply it back to the text. And then the second one is I want you to discuss how understanding one's own personal biases can help them become a better bureaucrat. And I would argue not just a bureaucrat, but it helps become a better human being. In this podcast, you're going to hear about a thing called an implicit bias test. You do have an opportunity to take one of these. They're totally free to take, and they're offered through Harvard. And you just click on this, and it'll bring you to the Project Implicit. And then, let's see here. I'm trying to remember how you start this. So then you just click on the Project Implicit. You read this section here. It will give you some information on what this is. And then you click on I wish to proceed. And then you can take all these tests and look at where your biases sit. And I do recommend you try to take a couple of these. They could tell you a lot of information about yourself. So this is the implicit bias test. What you do is you click on it, and then it lets you go through in a series of questions. If you take it a few times, you'll get the hang of it. But it's important to understand your biases. And so what a bias, implicit bias is, it's a bias or a judgment or a behavior that results in subtle processes that take place. So there's attitudes and stereotypes that people have, and they operate at the level below your conscious awareness. And so these tests help you notice what your biases are. And again, people have these. There's something that it's important to understand. Where you have your biases, how biased you are, and be able to address that. So I want you to discuss that. But again, this is optional. If you are interested and you do take it, you can. I will set up a Dropbox actually for extra credit. So it is something I want you to do if you have the time. If not, it's like I said, it's not required for the class. But I will set up a Dropbox perhaps on Monday to allow you to get extra credit on this assignment. Going back to our Dropboxes, we have the policy implementation, and this is important to understand. So this is the part of the paper. You've already identified some ways you are going to try to address the policy. So now what you're going to do is you're going to decide on which one of these possible solutions you're going to pursue. So I want you to write a couple of paragraphs to explain the reason that you chose this direction to address the problem. So again, you should have maybe a couple of ideas on how you're going to address the problem you discussed, including, like I said, maintaining the status quo. So letting the present trends continue. That's always an option. But you're going to decide at this point which one you're going to put forward for your policy. So once you have that done, you'll have 3/5 of your paper completed. And like I said, we're working in increments here, so each one of these sections will be a part of your final paper that you turn in at the end of the semester. So if you have any questions, make sure you get back to me. Send me an email on D2L. I've been receiving some emails on the school email, on the stephen.dejoy@bhsu.edu. I don't check that quite as often as I do this one, so if you do want to get a hold of me, send me an email on D2L. It's much faster. And if you're still not sure of how to do that, you can just go on to the class list. You can email anybody in the class, but it's a good way to get a hold of people. And like I said, on D2L, there's a permanent record of your conversation. So if I don't get back to you, it's right there in front of me that I missed it. So, but have a great week, and get a hold of me if you have any questions. Thank you.